I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. This week, Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine joins us. He'll discuss the future of New York's cultural and economic heart. But first, a look at New York City's new police commissioner and the impact of Donald Trump's re-election on federal oversight of the NYPD's sex crimes unit. We're joined by Ashley Southall, a New York Times Metro reporter and former police bureau chief of the Times. Ashley, we've got a new police commissioner, the fourth, I think, under Mayor Adams. Jessica Tisch, the sanitation commissioner, moving back to the police department. What do we know about her, and what are the circumstances of her appointment as police commissioner?
Yes, so I overlapped with Jessica Tisch when I covered the New York City Police Department, and she was the head of information and technology at the NYPD. She oversaw the rollout of police body cameras, part of the adaptation of cell phones, and she had left that role or left the city. She had moved on to be the city's IT director until she became the sanitation commissioner. And in sanitation, she oversaw the rollout of what we're seeing now with the containerization of trash, a measure that has had mixed reception. And so she appears to be up for a very demanding job. She's known for being a demanding boss. The circumstances of her elevation, however, are quite peculiar. It's rare and in the New York City Police Department for a true civilian, someone who's never had sworn law enforcement experience, to be elevated to police commissioner. If you think of many of the commissioners of the last decade, whether it's Bill Bratton or Dermot Shea or Jim O'Neill, Keechant Sewell, Edward Caban, all sworn police officers. And Jessica Tisch is very different. She comes from a billionaire family, the Ivy League, and she sort of came in through the police department. Her family are very big NYPD donors through the Police Foundation. And it's almost as if Eric Adams just sort of looked around to see who he had left, and she was picked for the role. That's not to say that she's unqualified. She does have some of the skills needed to be the police commissioner, and she does have a history with that department, which is very important, her managerial skills and her relationships with the department. And I expect that we will learn a lot more about both her time at sanitation and her time in the police department and in her go around as police commissioner.
If I remember correctly, she's probably the first true civilian since Bob Maguire under the Koch administration. She was highly respected, as I recall, in the police department as a technocrat in the sanitation department as well. She probably is the first Jewish woman police commissioner also. Now, one thing that I think is striking, if I were asked to be the police commissioner right now, the first thing I would tell Mayor Adams is, butt out. You know, if I'm going to be the police commissioner, you stay at City Hall, I'm at police headquarters. Is there any indication that that is the arrangement, ideally, that she would make or is capable of making with Mayor Adams?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think the mayor is weakened, and a new police commissioner with some familiarity at that department probably has greater leeway than, say, his first police commissioner, Keechant Sewell, over the decision-making in the department. The mayor has lots of other things to do, including replacing top aides, running for re-election, managing a possible trial. So he's pretty wrapped up, and I think that Commissioner Tisch, I was trying to remember the proper title now, will probably be able to do a lot more on her own than her predecessors. But that said, the mayor still has very strong relationships with people in the department. There are certain, public safety was one of his main campaign, I should say it was his main campaign sale. So, and that's what got him elected. So, you know, he's still very concerned that he still takes pride in the crime numbers and the enforcement against illegal smoke shops. So I expect that the mayor will still want to have some input in how public safety is carried out in the city.
As every mayor has before him. Ashley, you wrote a story recently in the Times about the sex crimes unit under federal oversight and how that may change under a Trump administration. Tell us about that.
It's been about 2 years that the Justice Department has been looking into how the New York City Police Department sex crimes unit, known as Special Victims, some of your viewers might recognize the name from the show of the same name that was inspired by it. And so they were looking into handling of sex crimes by this unit after years of complaints by victims, but also a pivotal city report that outlined the understaffing, the lack of training, and many other problems in this division, and the efforts of a commander to ask the top brass of the police department to fix those problems, but they still persisted and were left unfixed. This played out very publicly in 2018 and 2019, and a couple of years later, a few years later, actually, the Justice Department stepped in under President Biden and said, you know, we're going to take a look at this as possible gender discrimination. And the goal of this type of investigation is known as a pattern of practice investigation, is to enter into a consent decree to reform police departments.
And has there been any reform? There's a new commander, as you pointed out. Have any changes actually taken place because of this federal involvement?
Mm-hmm. I can't say what changes have been made because of the federal involvement. However, Eric Adams had just come into office in 2022, so he installed a new special victims commander. They made some changes to training and headcount. However, it's not clear yet whether any of those changes have resulted in more arrests or prosecutions for sex crimes or more cases being thoroughly investigated, which was a huge issue. In a lot of the cases, victims were complaining that detectives weren't even doing the basic steps of an investigation. In the NYPD data, the clearance numbers, which reflect basically how cases were closed, the numbers have not changed to suggest that anything has improved, but change sometimes takes time, but these changes are long delayed.
And Ashley, you said the clock is ticking. Is that because we are concerned the Trump administration may abandon this oversight?
Yes, on the campaign trail, Trump has expressed hostility towards the Department of Justice. He privately has expressed that he would like to end these kinds of investigations, the scrutiny of police, and give the police more power. And he wants police to be able to more aggressively go after crime. However, this case is a little bit different from the other pattern and practices cases where typically the Justice Department is coming in looking at where police may have gone overboard, excessive force, racial bias in stops and things like that. In this case, what they're saying is that the Justice Department, that the NYPD, is not doing enough to address rape, and that may be a point that appeals to Trump.
Ashley Southall of the New York Times, thank you for joining us. Coming up next, Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine. Mark Levine has emerged as a fierce advocate for the borough's most pressing challenges. Manhattan grapples with a housing crisis. Average rents now exceed $5,000 a month. The borough president is spearheading a plan to create 70,000 new homes on vacant lots and other places while pushing to transform Midtown's empty offices into residential spaces. Let's start with a timely issue, one that suddenly is timely again, congestion pricing. It's scheduled to take effect in January, barring court challenges. What is that really going to do to Manhattan? I can't believe it's going to affect traffic that much. You tell me.
Well, first, Sam, I just want to say I've been reading you and watching you for my entire adult life, and it's really an honor to be.
Makes me feel old.
I started very young.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we have a dual crisis in transportation in New York City, in Manhattan. First, it's the crisis of congestion on the streets, which has gotten so bad that during peak hours, the Midtown traffic speed is not much faster than walking. and it is extending response times for fire and ambulance and police to really dangerous levels, and it's a drag on our economy. So we've got to get a grip on the congestion crisis. We have a second crisis underground in mass transit where we have chronic underinvestment in our subway system. And congestion pricing is a policy to get at both of those challenges, to help reduce congestion on the street and create stable revenue to upgrade our subway system and our buses. Understanding it's controversial for sure, and I think your question is whether at a reduced fee of $9 we'll see much reduction in congestion. And I think probably a little bit, but I'm not even sure how much we would receive at $15 given, I think, people's ingrained commuting patterns. But there will be generated revenue that we'll need, and there will be some reduction that will improve speeds. On net, unquestionably a win for New York City.
Right. So at least we'll get more money if we don't see faster speeds and less traffic.
Yes, it's funny online when I hear people say both that we're not really going to generate much revenue and that no one will change their commuting pattern. Both those things can't be true. At the end of the day, I think we'll get benefits on both sides.
We'll get at least one, if not
Yes,
the other.
exactly.
Let me ask you a question that some people, I think, are confused about. What happens to people who live within that district south of 60th Street?
Well, if they make $60,000 or less, then the entire amount they spend on the fee will be rebated to them in the form of a tax credit at the end of the year. If they are in other parts of the city and there's a separate program at $50,000 is the income cutoff where they'll get half of the cost in reduced fees. So there is provisions in there to help people who have modest means. The truth is that most of the people who are driving into the central business district are middle and upper income. And most of the people who are low-income New Yorkers are taking mass transit. So I think there is an equity element here where this is going to benefit working class and low-income New Yorkers with better transit. And most of the people who will be paying the fee are of higher incomes.
So if you make $60,000 or more every time you go home, it's going to cost you $9.
Yes, now you only pay the fee going into the zone. You only pay it once a day. And if you're traveling off hours, it's I think it's $275. It's a 3/4 reduction. So if you leave the zone in the morning and come back, say after 9 p.m., you'll pay very little. I think some people are confused on the facts of how this works. But yes, this is going to be a challenge for some people in Manhattan, and I hear from them. And there are real concerns. But at the end of the day, this is desperately needed revenue for mass transit, and I think it's going to be good for the city.
Mark, well, I'm sure you hear from a lot of people who don't want more congestion, not from cars, but from buildings. How do you cope with that? How do you reconcile that with the need that almost everyone acknowledges for more housing, more affordable housing? And also nowadays, how do we define affordable housing? Affordable for whom?
Sam, there's a great contradiction at the heart of housing policy in New York, which is that almost everyone wants more housing in the city in a generic sense. But as soon as you propose a specific project on a given block, then people often come out against it. And that has impacted politics here for decades. And it's resulted in policies that have made it hard to add housing. You don't need a degree in economics to understand what's happened. When we create so little housing and there's intense demand, as there is, the price just goes up and up and up. And as you said in the intro, now average rents in Manhattan of $5,000 a month. It's pricing out not just low-income people, but middle-class people too. So we've got to break this contradiction. And I think we're making some progress by helping people understand the connection between an urgent homeless crisis and our lack of building housing. And what we did in this plan you referenced in your opening was we identified 171 sites around the borough where we can build. And I found it to be very interesting when I've discussed with people who see a project proposed in their neighborhood, not as specifically targeting them or unfairly focusing on their neighborhood, but part of a borough-wide effort to solve the housing problem, then people buy into the mission. So I think we are moving the needle on the politics of housing in New York, and that could save the city. It could make this a place again, where middle income and low income people can afford to live. That's the future I want for New York.
Do we have enough federal, state subsidies? Do developers have to provide more amenities? How do we encourage more of these apartments? I hate to call them units. Nobody lives in a unit.
Yeah. Homes.
How do we get more of those into the pipeline?
The federal support has been reduced steadily since the Reagan era, and I'm not optimistic now that under the Trump administration that trend will change. So while we do get some federal support, heavily relied on resources from the city and state. But honestly, Sam, as important as the subsidized housing is, we also need to activate the broader private market. We have an estimated 500,000 home deficit in New York City. And we can produce, 15,000 units a year in New York, which is wonderful. But it would take us a generation to meet the housing need at that pace. So we need both to increase public investment in income-targeted housing while also making it possible for the private sector to build more. Because when you do that, even the cost of market rate housing comes down. Sam, when I moved to the city in 1991, I just rented a market rate apartment. I got a studio
for less than $5,000.
Yeah, for $500 a month. And right now, if you want something at that level, you've got to enter a lottery for the affordable housing program. And while I want us to expand investment in affordable units, I also want us to bring down the broader price by building more private sector housing as well.
The Times recently did a story about a project in Manhattan Valley that you said was the most challenging land use project you ever dealt with. Why did that not work as well as it should have?
Well, this is 108th Street, where we've historically had city-owned garages. I don't think that should be the primary use of public-owned land in New York. And there was a proposal to knock the garages down and build affordable housing in its place. There was a lot of opposition. First, from people who parked their cars there, I get it, but also a little more nastily, people who didn't want poor people moving into the neighborhood. But I'm really proud that we got that rezoning through. The project was built. It's beautiful now. And I'm going to tell you, Sam, I have not received a single complaint about that project now that it's been built. It's actually made the neighborhood beautiful and more safe. And I think there's a lesson there about much of this, which is that often the opposition, which can become very intense up to the moment of approval, then melts away when people realize, actually this was fine, even good for the neighborhood. And so I talk to new elected officials and I tell this story to remind them that sometimes it can feel rough when you approach approval, but at the end of the day, good policy wins out.
They didn't want poor people moving in. What is the average rent in that project? Again, how do we define affordable housing?
It's a really good question because that word affordable has been stretched almost beyond meaning at this point.
Anyone anywhere else in the country wouldn't believe it for a minute.
Yeah, there are some units which are targeted to people making $100,000 or more. And we have historically neglected the lower end of the economic ladder in our affordable housing program. That's starting to change some. But the truth is, Sam, that even a bus driver making $80,000 a year can't afford an apartment in Manhattan right now. So I do think it's appropriate that we have some units targeted at a little closer to middle income. But at the end of the day, the biggest struggles and therefore our biggest priority should be people who are making minimum wage, who are struggling with homelessness. And for those folks, you do need housing targeted to someone making $30,000 a year or $40,000. The development that we built on 108th Street had extremely low income targets, and there are people there making $40,000 a year or lower. But they have great social service support in the building. They have 24/7 security staffing. They have all kinds of social services infused into the development. It's a safe community. It's been good for the neighborhood. First and foremost, it's great housing for families that need it. It's the kind of model we need to replicate hundreds of times all over New York City.
You're planning to run for controller?
Yes, I am.
Why?
Well, this is a very precarious moment for New York City because of some of the economic challenges and public safety challenges that we face, but also because we have a new administration taking over all pillars of government in Washington that is potentially going to be quite hostile to our interests, could target vulnerable populations here. We need local government to step up now, first to protect our people, also to deliver results for New Yorkers, and to show that Democrats in control of local government can govern well. We need to show that to the country. And the comptroller is the second most important job in New York City. Critical at any time, but I think even more important now because of its influence over the budget. We want a budget which reflects our values, fully funding things like parks and libraries, but also because it can ensure every agency of the government is delivering for regular New Yorkers. So I'm stepping up for this role now at a critical time for New York City. Really excited about the campaign so far.
Do we need a new administration at City Hall?
Well, I'm not going to weigh in with an endorsement now in the mayor's race, if that's what you're asking, but I have a lot of concerns about the direction of New York City right now. With affordability, as we've been talking about, with public safety, with a homeless crisis, a broken mental health system. It's just getting tougher and tougher for regular families, tougher to find affordable childcare, tougher to get your kid into a good school, tougher to get to work on time. So, Sam, I'm talking about these things in my campaign, and I think we need to do better on many fronts, or we're going to keep losing the middle class. We're going to keep losing young families. I don't want that to be the future for New York City.
As a borough president, this is sort of a loaded question, of course. Did you ever get any emoluments from a foreign government or foreign company, Turkey for one?
No, I have not, but I actually don't know if I've talked about this publicly before. I was called into the Turkish consulate when I became Manhattan Borough president, and I was offered numerous times in the meeting a trip, an all-expense-paid trip to Turkey, which some alarm bells ringing when they said that, so I didn't accept, as you might imagine. But yeah, I think we all have to be careful about accepting those kinds of free offers. Certainly I am.
We just had charter revision proposed by the mayor, not by the city council. If you were in charge of revising the charter as borough president or as controller, what would you do?
The public did approve most of those provisions. They will tip the balance, I think, slightly in favor of power for the mayor. I was not happy with the process that led to them. I thought it was a power play just to block some reasonable proposals by the city council. And actually, a new charter revision process is underway now. The city council has introduced legislation that would put questions on the ballot a year from now. And as borough president, I will have an appointment to the Charter Commission. So I don't think I'm ready to weigh in yet on my proposals, but I'm going to be extremely engaged in this process. Again, I'll have a formal voice with an appointment to the commission. I encourage regular New Yorkers to speak up now about how you want government to improve how we can tackle the problems that you're facing day to day.
I don't want to sound old-fashioned, but I remember covering endlessly the Board of Estimate meetings. The Board of Estimate was declared unconstitutional because it violated one person, one vote. But there was also a level of transparency because you got to see virtually every contract of over $10,000. There was the Board of Estimate calendar. Was that a good idea? Should we go back to something like that? Some sort of procedure that led to a more open government in that way?
Fun fact, Sam, come by my office. We have the old chair that the Manhattan borough president used to use in the Board of Estimate. It's a 200-pound piece of oak artwork.
I remember them well.
But in terms of your question, we need more transparency in contracting because we have seen certainly allegations of corruption in recent months, actually charges filed. And I think there have been some well-meaning attempts to loosen oversight over some of the contracting, sometimes with the goal of MWBE, contracting, et cetera. But it has created an opening for, I think, some inappropriate practices. So I think we probably need to turn the needle back towards more oversight and transparency, not to bring back the Board of Estimate, but I think we can do it in the context of the Comptroller's office, which actually has considerable power and oversight over contracting, and probably should be a little more evolved in the approval process.
Mark Levine, the Manhattan Borough President, thank you so much for joining us. And coming up next, my thoughts on jaywalking. Guess the derivation of the term jaywalking. It's got nothing to do with the contour of the letter J. Following that route would only get you halfway back to where you started. It apparently originated when Jays were synonymous with oblivious rubes, hicks, and country bumpkins who, discombobulated by big city traffic, drove their horse carts on the wrong side of the road. Then it was applied to visiting pedestrians dumb enough to cross in mid-block in order to dodge the newfangled gas-powered vehicles usurping city streets. Last month, the City Council legalized jaywalking. It's the latest example of defining deviancy down, or if you can't beat 'em, join 'em. You're not alone if you didn't know jaywalking was illegal, but it has been, to one degree or another, for nearly a century. In 1924, the city's Merchant Association lobbied to empower the police to stop pedestrians from crossing the street except at corner intersections. In 1930, Mayor Jimmy Walker, who was known for cutting corners when it came to other regulations, agreed to impose a jaywalking ban. On May 20th that year, Benny Karps of 790 Riverside Drive received the first summons for stepping off the sidewalk on 8th Avenue near 37th Street. The enforcement campaign fizzled until 1958. That's when the cross at the green, not in between mantra was adopted. It didn't exactly make jaywalking a criminal offense, but it stipulated that between corners, motorists had the right of way, and it imposed penalties on pedestrians. In the 1990s, the Giuliani administration installed steel gates. It increased fines from $3 to $50. That failed too. The first offender, Brenda Barnes, became a cause célèbre. She was spared because the officer who issued the summons cited the wrong statute. The police estimate that about 200 people died from jaywalking in the past 5 years. They accounted for about a third of pedestrian fatalities. What doomed illegal jaywalking, though, was another statistic that reeked of racial profiling. Last year, more than 92% of jaywalking citations were issued to Black and Latino New Yorkers. No way they jaywalk more than whites. Some say mid-block crosswalks could actually prove safer because pedestrians have to look only in two directions. Also, why not recalibrate more traffic lights to give pedestrians a small head start against turning traffic? But just legalizing jaywalking means admitting that the country bumpkins weren't so dumb after all. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts. And don't forget to download the CUNY TV app. You can catch our weekly program on the go, anytime, anywhere.